Welcome to day one of the Virtual Island Summit 2023. Thank you so much for joining us at this session. My name is Cristian Sakino, and I am the Chief of Staff and Technology Lead here at Island Innovation. I am based in the beautiful city of Vigo in the northwest part of Spain, but I'm originally from Margarita Island off the coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean. So greetings to everyone. I am very happy to be introducing you to this session titled Celebrating 5 Years of the Virtual Island Summit, an interview with James Ellsmoor, CEO of Island Innovation. Our CEO is going to reflect over the past 5 years of the organization's growth and the impact that the Virtual Island Summit has had. From a niche newsletter to a fully staffed sustainability consultancy, Island Innovation has grown at a rapid rate, and its flagship Virtual Island Summit continues to bring together key island stakeholders from around the globe. Join us, and please, let's give you a sneak peek into the inner workings of the organizations and the future. Before we begin with the session, you should see a poll appear on your screen right now. Please let us know where you're connecting from. And also, if you scroll down a little bit on the pop-up of the poll, you will see the sector and industry. So please select an option that suits you the best so we can get to know you better. And I see a lot of people in the chat. The chat is an amazing place to network and also to connect with other people around the globe. I can see people from Cape Verde, from Trinidad, people from different parts of the world connecting. I want to ask you to also please make sure you use the Q&A function for your questions. We will have the interview, and at the later part of the session, we will have a Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions, and the moderator and the speaker are going to respond at the end. All right, so I see a lot of participation here. Let's see how are the poll results going. We have a contingency of people from my beautiful Caribbean region here, so thank you so much. Almost 35% of the attendees are from the Caribbean, followed closely by North America with 29% and Europe with 21%, so thank you so much. We also see participation from the Pacific at 5%. Thank you so much, Pacific Islanders, for being here. I know it's very late for some of you there, so we appreciate you joining us. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for the session, Professor Andrew Jennings, who is an associate professor in island studies at the University of Highlands and Islands. Professor Andrew, you can take it away.
Thank you very much indeed, Christian. It's a great honor to be here and to have the chance to ask questions of my old student, James. Hello, James. It's great to have this opportunity, I have to say. And it's been a wee while. You know, we first met over 7 years ago now. I checked my old emails and I found out that it was on the 20th of April, 2016, when I interviewed you online for the MLit in Island Studies. And I suspected that you would go on to graduate with distinction, which you duly did. And I must say, I wasn't surprised when you were recognized as the UHI, that's the University of the Highlands and Islands, Postgraduate Student of the Year in 2018, not to mention we recognized as the UHI Alumnus of the Year in 2020. Now, you'd be glad to know that I have read and enjoyed your dissertation, Green Islands, Communicating Sustainability Through Islandness, a number of times since you handed it in. So I didn't just read it once, I've been reading it since as well. And I'm really pleased that we've kept in touch over the years and that you've contributed a chapter changing the definition of isolation by building digital bridges for the book that myself and Laurie Brinklow are editing, which for those who are interested and want to read what James has to say, is called The Bridge Effect, Critical Reflections in the Age of Technological Solutionism. My goodness. And it's also been great that you've taken part in several webinars that I've organized, sharing your experience and expertise. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experience with Island Innovation and the Virtual Island Summit over the last 5 years, and about your ambitions for the future. And I've got a number of questions I'd like to ask you, which will get us going in this conversation. So I thought I'd start with just a nice, easy one. What made you decide to start Island Innovation in the first place? And who and what were you inspired by?
Thank you, Andrew. That's great to hear those reflections. I hadn't quite realized it was 7 years since I initially approached you to do the Masters in Island Studies at the UHI, the University of the Highlands. I would say this is a great question to have, because I always find that we, as Island Innovation, not just me and the team, we're interacting with so many people virtually. And one of the first questions I get asked when someone finally meets me in person after maybe communicating online for many years is, so how did this happen? What was the origin story? And I will say there was no particular path. There was no particular business plan, let's say, at the start that said, okay, this is how it's going to work. My original interests had been in renewable energy policy. Although I think I'd always had an interest and fascination with islands from a young age. I grew up not on an island, but in a very rural part of England that kind of gave me some interests and some understanding of rurality. And then the interest in renewables led me to islands, where renewable energy, especially at the time, was kind of at the cutting edge for many island communities and was having a huge impact not only in Scotland, but in the Caribbean. So I was very privileged to have been able to do a research project in the South Pacific, then work for several years in the Caribbean. And I think while I was studying for the Masters in Island Studies with students from around the Scottish Islands, I was based in the Caribbean at that time. So it was very interesting to then see how, a lot of your students freezing, sitting in front of the fire, and me sitting on the porch. But it was interesting to then see how similar many of the conversations that we were having were to conversations I was having in the small island states. Of course, the reality in the Scottish Islands is very different to the small island states, but there were these key topics that came up over and over again. And you had also brought in, as part of that program, guest speakers from the Faroe Islands, from Barbados, from Tasmania, the South Pacific. So we got exposed to a lot of different places, and that contributed to this idea of building a platform to be able to really build connections between islands, and especially islands of different political status. Shetland, where you are, is quite small for a UK municipality, for a county, but it's still larger than some independent UN members in terms of population. And so that idea, again, of how can local government, provincial or regional government, and a national government have an opportunity, people from those different jurisdictions have an opportunity to communicate. So after really just writing about these through my dissertation, and then through a blog and a newsletter, and also when I was a contributor at Forbes.com, I was able to write about these different things, and it really grew from there into a platform that I was able to then build out.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. You've sort of come to islands. I think I drove reasonably close to where you actually come from on my summer holidays this year, sort of the Welsh-English border kind of area, which is quite far from the coast. So, you say you were interested in islands. Well, where do you think that came from?
I wouldn't say that obviously the coastal nature is a big part of it, but also the idea of more being removed from the center, or peripherality, I guess, was what I'm seeing as that original connection. But I think I was lucky enough to have these experiences in traveling to different islands, and obviously there is the natural beauty and the different cultures and all of these different elements. But I think also this idea that island regions were often, for issues like climate change, the first to be affected and the first to feel the impacts of that, and then often seeing that framed as I guess islands being the victims. But actually what I saw was that many islands were then being pushed to be at the forefront of creating solutions, because they were having these impacts before other regions, whether it was in renewable energy, dealing with their waste, dealing with their tourism, and the impacts of the tourism industry. Being creating solutions and really being innovative. And I think you taught me this, that really islanders by nature are put in a position where they need to be innovative because there is a limitation on what resources are available. And often you see that especially in the small islands in Shetland or in other parts of Scotland, you see that islanders will wear many different hats and be able to bring those together. And so I guess that obviously led into the name of the organization, Island Innovation.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you took inspiration from the degree. How did you find studying the masters at a distance?
I think it's worth pointing out that this was pre-COVID. So at the time, the idea of what is so common now was still relatively underutilized compared to what we see now. And I think that UHI, and you often see this in island regions, UHI as an institution was set up remote first, and so was already prepared for the impacts of the pandemic. But needing to provide education to over 100 institutions, for me, what was very interesting, not only were the different topics that we studied, but also the institutions set up for islands in the first place, and how being able to provide education to those places was necessary. And actually, while I was working in the Caribbean, it was very interesting to me that many organizations in the Caribbean were also set up this way. It was very common before COVID to have teams that were spread across multiple countries and had people used to collaborating remotely in a way that people perhaps in New York or London or other large cities were not accustomed to. So although islands were very adversely affected by COVID, there was also many of these aspects that people were already used to. And that informed the idea of creating this summit, the Virtual Island Summit. Again, in a time when we had to explain that there was this thing called Zoom and what it meant and how it worked and how to mute your microphone, all those things that we're very used to now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was just wondering, you mentioned this fantastic event that you've been running now for the last 5 years. I just wondered, how has it evolved, would you say?
So Island Innovation as an organization, I think the Virtual Island Summit is our pivotal, our flagship event each year. And so we've kind of grown around this event. And Christian, who did the introduction at the start of this, was actually the very first Island Innovation employee working for 1 day a week from afar. And now over time, starting as my assistant, is now our chief of staff and working and helping us lead a whole organization of 18 people working and living remotely all around the world. So a lot of this, Christian has really grown with the organization and helped us establish this event. So the Virtual Island Summit was set up as a free and open access platform. I think that was also critical for me, that I had been lucky enough to attend big UN events like the COPs. I was on the Seychelles delegation for a number of years and working with those. And I often saw the same people every year saying the same things and in these kind of closed rooms. And I realized there was a lot of value for this kind of information to people from a wide variety of islands doing work on the ground. In the opening session, we had the prime ministers and the high level speakers, and it's really important that you have that high level political buy-in. But we always try and balance that with the grassroots practitioners that might be doing very, very localized work in not even on one island, but on one small village or one small part of an island, and trying to find that balance between the high level political conversation that can sometimes feel a bit out of reach, but also examples of what people are doing. And so I think I'm happy to say that I think over the years, Island Innovation's Virtual Island Summit has become a bit of an institution where we have actually prime ministers and governors, their teams reach out to us and say, our prime minister would like to speak at the event this year, which is an interesting place to be now. And we always try and make sure we represent as many different regions as possible. It's always hard. We certainly have our biases towards some regions, but we try and extend that to make it accessible and open and have a wide range of regions. Really, what we have in common is islands. And then beyond that, people are doing a lot of different things. So that can be a challenge as well.
Yeah, I see that Stacey has put in the chat that inclusivity of the Virtual Island Summit is what she and yourself and everyone who takes part love the most. And you've sort of answered partly the question that I was going to ask next, and that is, you've got people from around the globe wanting to take part and contacting you. So what is it, do you think that, how would you attribute the growth of island innovation and the Virtual Island Summit? What is it that makes people in islands want to take part and be part of this extraordinary event?
I think it does vary a lot across different people, the reasons, but there was obviously a gap in this format of not necessarily having such a broad conference. And I think that the breadth does again give challenges, because sometimes whatever we do, we're going to miss someone or something. It's really hard to try and cover all the different bases. But I think the openness of it, as you mentioned, and the inclusivity, but then also the types of topics and the access to the kind of speakers that we have, we always try and cover a range of different things, and each week is never going to be everything is not going to be interesting to everyone, and that's fine. It's, we have, I think, 40 sessions this week, but maybe a handful of those will be interesting to any one person. So I think there was this gap. I also heard from a number of island participants that, what was the phrase I heard? Someone say that, well, before we kind of felt alone as an island, there wasn't this idea of a global island community. In some areas there was. I mean, in the Caribbean region, you have CARICOM as a grouping. In the Pacific, you have Pacific Islands as a grouping, and there are regional programs within those. But there's also many other isolated islands that don't fall within a region, and don't necessarily have those connections to other islands in the region. And I think that it's only something that could have existed in the last 5 or 10 years, a virtually based community that's based on isolation. Because by definition, this was hard to exist in before. So I think that the reason for joining varies a lot from different people and from different projects, and it's also quite hard for us sometimes to measure the impact of this, because we're really just providing a platform for people to talk to each other, and then people talk. But I've seen the examples of projects that involve Fiji and Malta and the Shetland Islands and the Caribbean that existed and came into being out of this program. So I think it's really exciting to be able to give that platform to allow people to be able to then meet each other and then go off and do their own things. And even if it's just inspiration, because there is a lot of the time ideas will go round and round in circles, and you need that kind of external inspiration. And so often an idea has been solved in a different context, and it just needs tweaking and adapting to be able to be implemented locally. And I think that idea of inspiration and learning from others is what was critical for making the platform work.
Yeah, and it's good. It would be difficult without the technology that we have today. There was one thing I was very interested in, how it's grown as well. So, how has the sort of the geographical spread and the representation changed since you started?
Definitely. I mean, anyone who's attended our events will always see a strong Caribbean contingent. We're very happy to have a big contingent for the Caribbean, and that's also because about a third of our team is from the Caribbean. I also worked there for many years and have a strong base there. So we definitely have that, and we've made an effort to involve as many other regions as possible. So we do have many people from the Scottish Islands joining, and really it is global. You'll see even in this session, I've seen Patagonia, the South Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Arctic. So you'll always get that range. One of the limitations, unfortunately, is language. It's hard for us to overcome. So as much as possible, we do try and include people, but the reality of providing information in different languages is hard. So that's why you might see some countries represented less than others. But we're working on that. We're always trying to find solutions. I would love to find ways to be able to offer our programs in different languages. Often it's just a cost. The reality is it's a cost element that being able to do that is difficult. And it's interesting because we do have the small island states, but we also have, as I mentioned, the Scottish or Irish or Norwegian islands as well, which perhaps have a lot in common with each other, But I do think people's minds open and say, okay, actually, these far off places, which I might not really know much about, as you start to learn, you start to see, okay, there's more and more of the commonalities that emerge.
Yeah, indeed there are, and just through experience, you find that there are connections. So there's a connection between Shetland, Orkney, and Rapa Nui that has become apparent, and Lewis, the Isle of Lewis, as well, through some archaeological research that's going on. So there's all these extraordinary things. Well, that sort of brings me to my next question. What are your future goals and aspirations, and are there sort of not just perhaps in the sort of issues that you want to address, but maybe are there other areas of the world that you want to bring in?
So, to be honest, we've experimented a lot over the years of what island innovation is, what works, what doesn't. It's not always the easiest thing, given the global spread. That's often presents some challenges. For example, funding. Often a funder is very interested in one region or one island. So trying to have this global network is not always the easiest thing to be able to fund projects. And obviously all the work we do, having a team of 18 people, it does require some funding. That's the reality of it. But the way I kind of describe island innovation now as where we are is, on the one hand, we have the communications and media platform, which includes our events, our blogs, our policy papers, interviews and newsletter, all of those things. And then on the other side is impact consultancy for sustainability, which also encompasses a range of projects. So we'll work with, we have a wide variety of projects going on now where we will work to support island-based governments or NGOs, other organizations, to be able to increase the impact of their work. And I think that what we're able to provide is a strong network of people that we're able to bring in, but also an understanding, even if it's an island that we don't have a network, it's an understanding of how government and the private sector and NGO and these different groups work, or in some cases do not work together, and how that can influence the impact or the story you're trying to tell. So we have some organizations that we've worked with for many years, such as the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, which does amazing work to finance conservation around the whole Caribbean region. And we bring our range of communications background skills, as well as an understanding of the sustainable development sector, to help really complement the great work that their team is doing and help them tell their story. Now we have some really interesting programs that we've developed over the years, especially around COP28. So leading up to the climate conference later this year, we will actually have a stage for a week in Dubai. We'll be taking a team of six of our team going to Dubai, but also we will be taking, thank you to the Open Societies Foundations, we'll be taking a team of 10 young climate advocates from the Caribbean to COP28 to have their voices heard, working with them to get them in the media, to really showcase their work. And that's really exciting, because I know sometimes these conferences can feel very high level and a lot of talk and not so impactful, but taking 10 people who are already doing amazing work on the ground to see how this global system works and how they can take advantage of that to then come home and increase the impact of their work is really exciting. So we have a fantastic group of people, and you'll hear more about that later this week, who are going to be going there. And that will lead then into some of the other big events, as some of you might have heard earlier, our event in Prince Edward Island next year as well. So we always have a lot of different programs going on. And I think what's exciting is to be able to complement this virtual work with then having some impactful in-person programs on the ground, whether it's events or initiatives where we're providing assistance to organizations, to then be able to meet people in real life, and people say, oh, James, you're not just a computer algorithm, you do exist in real life. But that's always really exciting. And having our team be able to come together and get to know each other, because we've had many of our team members have been working now. I mean, Christian, we've been working together for over 5 years. And actually, the first time I'm going to meet him in person will be next week for our senior leadership retreat in Curacao. And it's amazing that is possible, to be able to have this team from many different cultures, many different places working together, but then to be able to create something from that.
That sounds wonderful. Yeah, all some fantastic and exciting things ahead. And well, the event in Prince Edward Island sounds particularly appealing to me. Which so this we've come nearly to the end, and you've highlighted the work that Island Innovation does and its interaction with local governments, island governments, and your sort of advocacy for a whole range of important island issues. So I see you've now moved into the academic sphere and wanting to have a sort of academic connection and sort of element in the island innovation. And I wondered how you see the role of the academic council that you've set up in future. How do you see that helping island innovation?
So we've always had this connection with some different universities, like yourself at UHI, University of Malta, University of Prince Edward Island, some of the Caribbean and Pacific institutions as well. And we wanted to formalize that in a way, because I always saw so much great information and knowledge being produced. And I think especially by island-based universities, I think often the big international institutions are very much focused on publish, 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 whereas often island-based universities are embedded in the communities. Either it's that professors have often worked in local government or other organizations in some cases, and there is this kind of exchange between the university and other local organizations, or just that they're more engaged in contributing to them. And so what we wanted to do is to use our network and our platform to really help some universities and work with them to operationalize some of the research that was coming out. So where relevant, turning academic papers or academic research that is sometimes to non-academics not so accessible, either because it's behind a paywall or because of the kind of the ways that it's written. And so we are really excited to be building the Academic Council now. We have over 20 island-based universities from around the world that have signed up, and to work with island academics to help distribute the research that they're already doing. So it's not new research, it's just helping to use our network to distribute that so that policymakers or other organizations based on islands can actually use that and find it in a way. Because we know often if we give a 20-page academic paper to an island policymaker, they may not read it, or if they do read it, they may not be able to use that in a way. So trying to bridge that gap, and this is not just between the academic sector and policymakers. I would say, in a way, this is the role of island innovation as a whole. It's I almost describe it as an interpreter, not just between different islands in different parts of the world to provide digital bridges between them, but even within an island to bridge the different sectors. Because for sustainable development, you need government, NGOs, academics, and the private sector all to be able to collaborate in some way or one way or another. And so again, our role is trying to help facilitate that. And there's always often many great collaborations happening, but to be able to give a bit of a platform to some of the great research that's going on. So we would invite any island-based institutions that have not already signed up to become part of the Academic Council. And over the next few months, we'll be releasing some of the first policy papers that have come out of that initiative. And I think this is a great way to use the network that we have to provide more tangible information that policymakers and others can use.
Exciting times ahead. So I think that's our half hour, James. So I think it's time to wrap things up. Thanks very much indeed for sharing your thoughts about island innovation and the Virtual Island Summit. And I always thought it was such an exciting thing you were involved in, and I can see that it's got an exciting future still ahead of it as well. So that's wonderful. So here's to the next 5 years, and hopefully we'll see you in Shetland one of these days. You've never made it here yet.
Still not made it to Shetland. Things keep getting in the way, like global pandemics sometimes. So we need to try and make sure that changes sooner rather than later. I would definitely love to make it up there. I just wanted to say thanks as well to everyone who's been watching this. I can see a lot of great comments in the in the chat from different people. Sorry, we didn't get to address all of those, but hopefully we gave you some new information about what Island Innovation is and how we got here. And a big thank you to you, Andrew, for all your support over the years, and for the Masters in Island Studies for kind of creating this foundation to build the organization off.
Well, it's been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I'll just say we have another session coming up in just under 30 minutes. So we'd encourage you to stick around if you can to join that session. One of our team members, Audrey Rashim, based in Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, will be interviewing Marcelo Cabral from the IDB Lab and the Inter-American Development Bank. And so that will be a very interesting session about ESG and green development in small island states. So do stick around for that in 30 minutes. Thanks again, Andrew. Thanks everyone for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye. All the best.